Donald Trump has delivered a major salvo in his trade war, this time aimed squarely at Canada. In a letter addressed to Prime Minister Mark Carney and posted on social media, Trump said the U.S. will charge Canada a tariff of 35% on Canadian.
The government of Canada will be responding by matching the U.S. approach. A
seismic $22 billion shockwave just erupted across North America's supply chain, triggered by President Trump's aggressive move to hike tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum by a staggering 50%. Within hours, Ottawa retaliated with a mirror blow, slapping a 50% tariff on an equivalent $22 billion worth of American goods. The immediate fallout is already reshaping the economy. Electric vehicle motors, Detroit's iconic pickup frames, and even the aluminum shells used in millions of beer cans cracked open every night by American consumers are now surging in price. For a nation already reeling from inflation, this tariff war has hit wallets fast, hard, and with devastating precision. Is the White House sabotaging its own electric vehicle future by inflaming its most critical supply lines? You'll find out in today's video. Make sure to subscribe to Red Alert Media so you never miss our deep dives into the latest geopolitical and economic showdowns. Canadian Finance Minister Mark Carney took just 48 hours to respond, signing off on a retaliatory order targeting a $22 billion basket of U.S. exports. In a sharp rebuke of Washington's national security justification, Carney dismissed it as baseless protectionism propped up by faulty data. According to a detailed list from Canada's Ministry of Finance, 284 U.S. products, including EV motors, F-Series pickup steel frames, and aluminum coil stock, will now be subject to the harsh new tariffs. The total, when converted, equals 30 billion Canadian dollars or roughly 22 billion U.S. dollars. The reverberations are already being felt across the North American supply chain. Around 90% of the steel and half of the aluminum used by U.S. manufacturers comes from Canada. Meanwhile, Canada consumes about 20% of America's steel exports. The effect on prices was immediate. Within just 3 trading sessions, the cost of imported EV motors spiked by 12%. Aluminum can sheet prices on the Chicago Board of Trade shot above $3,500 per ton, the highest since 2022. Beverage industry giants were quick to warn that their summer discount campaigns may now be scrapped due to soaring material costs. But Carney didn't stop at just tariffs. He imposed a strict new mandate: every steel shipment entering Canada must include full melt and pour documentation, from the mine of origin and the furnace used, to the CO2 emissions per ton, proving that Canadian steel is cleaner and traceable. With 94% of Canadian steel produced using hydroelectric power, analysts are calling this a tactical ESG, environmental, social, and governance, maneuver. It turns clean steel into a climate-based competitive weapon and may put U.S. coal-fired steelmakers at a disadvantage should Washington escalate the dispute to the WTO. Simultaneously, Ottawa rolled out an emergency $1.5 billion USD support package for Quebec smelters aimed at ramping up domestic production and preserving jobs. But within just a week, the Aluminum Association of Canada reported that loan demand had nearly exhausted the allocated funds, pressing the federal government to consider additional injections. With winter approaching and cash flow tightening, Carney remains defiant. "We will not back down, only level up the game," he stated, hinting at broader tariffs and even quotas if Washington fails to de-escalate by the July 21 deadline. Meanwhile, U.S. EV manufacturers are scrambling to source motors and gearboxes amid growing supply uncertainty. The White House, hoping to dominate the domestic EV market, now faces a policy backfire of its own making. The 50% tariff intended to pressure Canada is boomeranging with force, raising doubts about America's ability to sustain its clean energy transition. If upcoming negotiations collapse, experts warn that retaliatory tariffs on both sides could escalate to 70%, a scenario the Bank of Canada says could erase 0.8% from North American GDP within just 6 months. Markets are already reacting to the turmoil. Less than 24 hours after Ottawa's countermeasures were signed into law, the Midwest Cold Rolled Steel Index, the pricing benchmark for pickup truck frames and EV shells, soared by $60 per short ton, pushing spot prices to $1,600, their highest since mid-2022. Aluminum followed closely. The Midwest Premium, which sets prices for everything from battery anodes to beverage cans, surged 54%, reaching 58 cents per pound, or about $1,270 per ton on June 2nd. Analysts at Goldman Sachs now warn this could spike further to 70 cents per pound once the full weight of the tariffs filters through the supply chain. The packaging industry is among the earliest casualties. Giants like Ball, Crown, and Modelo have already raised alarm bells, saying that the combined cost of aluminum duties and beer can surcharges, now up by an additional 25%, is pushing overall packaging expenses into double-digit percentage increases within just 3 days. This threatens to drive fresh waves of inflation directly into American supermarkets. Yet it is Detroit that may suffer the most. Ford has admitted that its newly ratified labor contract already adds an estimated $850 to the cost of every vehicle, particularly its best-selling F-Series pickups. And that's before the 50% steel and aluminum tariffs are even factored in. With inflation swelling, production costs skyrocketing, and North American trade hanging in the balance, one question remains: who will blink first, Trump, under the pressure of an election-year economy, or Carney, who is quickly becoming Canada's steel shield? Stay tuned, and make sure to subscribe to Deep State to follow every twist in this high-stakes economic standoff. A stark warning from J.D. Power, dated April 23, lays bare the brewing storm for North American automakers. To maintain sales at viable levels, car manufacturers will be forced to absorb roughly 70% of the tariff-induced cost hikes themselves, instead of passing them on to buyers, effectively erasing profit margins at Ford, GM, and Tesla long before Canadian consumers ever see the price tags. Even for those automakers attempting to shift some of the burden to end users, the pricing ceiling is fast approaching. According to projections from the Anderson Economic Group, American consumers should brace for a staggering $30 billion in added costs within the first year alone, directly tied to new tariffs on cars and parts. The pickup truck segment, in particular, may suffer a cost increase of up to $8,000 per vehicle, nearly 10 times the $850 that Ottawa initially modeled for raw material hikes alone. And even that smaller figure strikes corporate profits squarely, without sending a cent across the border into Canada. The electric vehicle market is facing an even more severe blow. Samsung SDI has raised alarms over soaring input costs, particularly for aluminum-coated anode foils and copper separator films, components essential for EV battery production. These increased costs are already showing up at their manufacturing plants in Indiana and Michigan. While executives stopped short of confirming whether prices for Tesla, Rivian, or GM's Ultium battery systems will rise, they did admit that second-quarter margins would be as thin as battery foil due to the newly imposed levies. With the Inflation Reduction Act capping the EV tax credit at $7,500 per vehicle, the steep rise in aluminum and steel prices could fully cancel out that incentive, turning it into a de facto reverse tax and striking a blow to Washington's flagship electrification policy. Within just 1 week, North America has weathered a brutal double shock: record-setting spikes in raw material prices, disorder in the packaging sector, and auto giants forced to eat 70% of the cost burden just to prevent a sales collapse. Analysts now refer to the crisis as the $22 billion earthquake. And troublingly, all signs suggest this quake may just be the first tremor. Nearly 3 weeks after Canada and the U.S. exchanged 50% tariff strikes, Prime Minister Mark Carney pulled the pin on yet another economic grenade, the $4.8 billion CAD Green Steel Fund. This massive fund isn't pulled from thin air, it's already being deployed. Just one transformational conversion project at ArcelorMittal Dofasco in Hamilton has already consumed $1.8 billion Canadian. Algoma Steel in Sault Ste. Marie has secured another $420 million Canadian in federal funding to transition from traditional blast furnaces to electric arc furnaces, EAF. The remaining capital will be drawn from the Net Zero Accelerator Fund and $8 billion Canadian program targeting emissions-heavy sectors, now pivoting with laser focus to steel and EV battery production. By rough estimates, these two flagship plants alone have already absorbed nearly $2.2 billion Canadian from Ottawa. Carney has vowed to unleash the remaining $2.6 billion over the next 18 months, aiming to give North American steel a brand overhaul, cutting carbon emissions by 60% by the year 2030. In exchange, Canada's steel industry is being asked to transform amid this tariff war. Dofasco plans to fully abandon its traditional blast furnace and oxygen converter route, shifting to hydrogen-fueled direct reduced iron (DRI) EAFs capable of slashing 3 million tons of CO2 emissions annually. Algoma aims to use 70% recycled scrap feedstock, cementing Ontario as Detroit's EV battery backyard. The Ministry of Finance is implementing a strict new accountability protocol. Every ton of subsidized steel must carry a carbon passport detailing its origin, energy source, and emissions footprint per coil of cold-rolled steel. In doing so, Carney is not merely deflecting the White House's tariff offensive, he's turning the moment into an opportunity to restructure Canada's entire metallurgy infrastructure. From Quebec's nighttime EAFs powered by hydroelectricity, to green hydrogen-based DRI facilities in Labrador, and a future-facing pellet export corridor to Japan and Korea, Ottawa is remapping its industrial future under ESG principles. Yet Carney understands that economic armor alone won't be enough. That's why Ottawa has now opened a legal front as well. On March 13, Canada formally filed WTO dispute case DS-635, targeting the U.S. over its removal of steel and aluminum tariff exemptions and its subsequent 50% duty hike. While the WTO appellate body remains gridlocked, largely due to Washington blocking the appointment of judges since 2019, Carney described the filing as pulling the pin on the global legal safety lever, laying the groundwork for multilateral retaliation. Behind the scenes, Canada has also begun sharing classified evidence with key East Asian allies. Intelligence packets have been quietly exchanged with Japan and South Korea, two countries that were hit with their own 25% steel tariff increase by President Trump on July 8. With these global trade alliances activating and steel prices skyrocketing, the stage is set not just for a North American standoff, but for a wider geopolitical trade war. If the three leading clean steel economies, Canada, Japan, and South Korea, simultaneously file WTO cases, the resulting political firestorm could strike directly at the heart of Donald Trump's America First campaign mantra. But lawsuits are only part of Carney's plan. On the home front, he has already triggered a powerful domestic policy lever. Starting July 21, all federal infrastructure contracts in Canada will be required to use domestically produced steel and aluminum, effectively locking out U.S. competitors. Additionally, a strict third-country import quota now blocks Chinese steel from entering Canada through backdoor re-exports via the United States. This move has forced major manufacturers, Ford, GM, Tesla, and even beverage giants like Anheuser-Busch, to recalculate their supply chain math. Do they continue importing U.S. parts burdened by Canada's retaliatory 50% tariff, or do they pivot quickly to Canada's green metal supply emerging from upgraded facilities in Hamilton and Sault Ste. Marie? Carney calls this strategy his three-pronged assault. First, symmetrical tariffs bounce economic pain directly back to Washington. Second, the $4.8 billion Green Steel Fund rapidly modernizes Canada's domestic mills, giving them a sustainable technological edge. And third, multilateral legal pressure from WTO filings traps the U.S. in a tightening circle of accountability. But the endgame goes beyond trade warfare. Carney wants to force the White House to reconsider its entire electric vehicle (EV) supply chain, where Canada's clean steel, anodized aluminum, and advanced battery casings are fast becoming irreplaceable components. Should Washington fail to de-escalate the crisis before the 2024 election cycle heats up, each American pickup truck could be saddled with nearly $850 Canadian in extra material costs. Meanwhile, Canada would be completing the transformation of its zero-carbon steel lines and positioning itself to export directly to the European Union, leveraging the EU's carbon border adjustment levy for top-dollar premiums. In this high-stakes game of tariff poker, Carney is wagering on four bold words: turn crisis into leverage. That $4.8 billion Canadian investment package may feel like the calm before a geopolitical storm, but it's already enough to rebrand Ottawa as the global clean steel champion, just as the EV market enters a hypergrowth phase. And Trump? He must act fast. He can choose to dial down tariffs and ease tensions with his northern neighbor, or stand by as U.S. voters pay sky-high prices for beer cans and truck frames, all in the heat of a re-election campaign. Conclusion: Canada has flipped the board entirely. With beer cans climbing in price and EV production lines grinding toward uncertainty, a fundamental question now dominates the discourse: who pays for the 50% tariff, U.S. consumers or the Made in USA badge itself? Mark Carney has clearly spotted the weak link and built a two-lane strategy. Either Washington retreats on tariffs and allows North America to unify under a green metal supply chain led by Canada, or it charges full speed into Trade War 2.0. The ironic pressure point? That brand new electric pickup rolling off a Texas assembly line now depends on every cent of clean aluminum sourced from Quebec. If Trump blinks and backs off, inflation might cool, Detroit's automakers keep their profit margins intact, and the continent's green transition rolls forward. But if he escalates even with one fiery tweet, Canada is prepared. Tariffs on copper, lithium, and EV batteries could soon follow, threatening the very core of America's green economy and electric vehicle future. In this poker showdown, Carney has laid down 3 aggressive cards: symmetrical tariffs to deliver immediate pain, the Green Steel Fund to future-proof Canadian industry, and a WTO lawsuit as geopolitical insurance. Meanwhile, the U.S. seems increasingly cornered. When Birkin prices rise and the IRA's green vehicle credits are neutralized by America's own tariff policy, voters and markets alike will demand answers. The next 3 weeks will be critical. Will America First evolve into America Pays, or will pragmatism prevail, leading to a cross-border compromise before Detroit's welding lines come to a halt? Which path do you believe the U.S. should take? Should North America unite behind a clean steel alliance, or charge headlong into a second, even more destructive trade war? Drop your thoughts below in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe to Deep State and ring the bell, so you stay ahead of every major political and economic shift.